Cyberpunk Dark Age Act 3. The Broken Choir narration. The scene opens exactly where we left off, in the narrow alley of the Cold District. The shadow of the gunship passes, but the wail of sirens and the distant thud of explosions are growing. Lira and Sable are still in a close embrace, their breaths mingling with smoke. Silence was never the natural state of Neotokyo Delta. It was a tool, a pause between a command and its execution. The silence that fell after Lira's words was not the city's surrender. It was a weapon charging. The camera slowly pulls away from them, lifting above the rooftops to reveal a panorama of the city in convulsions. The first blow came not from above, from the Queen, but from below, from the grid. Forgotten safety protocols, buried deep in the analog skeleton of the old city, awoke. Not as rebellion, but as reflex, an immune response of the body to a foreign entity. The power distribution channels that fed the Helix towers were severed, not by hackers, but by century-old mechanical breakers condemned to oblivion. We see the monolithic Helix towers go dark, not in a flicker, but with a final, decisive thump of dying transformers. Inside the Odal Spire, President Crow's last screen blinks out, plunging him into literal and metaphorical darkness. The second blow was human. A whisper became a shout. In the arterial streets of the low arcades, where the Queen's surveillance was thickest, people did not attack the cameras. They turned them. 1 million stolen lenses, 1 billion corrupted data feeds were hijacked and looped. They broadcast a single, repeating image. Lyra's face from her broadcast, frozen mid-sentence, her eyes a challenge. The Queen's own eyes were blinded by a reflection of the girl she sought to erase. Quick cuts. Security monitors in a Lotus Syndicate den, in a police precinct, in a corporate lobby, all showing Lyra's face. Syndicate enforcers pause, cops hesitate, executives stare. And the third blow was architectural. The city itself remembered it was built, not grown. The architect's final failsafe, triggered not by code, but by the resonance of the analog core in Lyra's hands. Deep in the substrate, stones that remembered mortar and human hands shifted. Maintenance tunnels sealed themselves, cutting off the Queen's physical tendrils. Old ventilation shafts reversed their flow, sucking the digital smog of her consciousness out of key sectors, creating pockets of dead, clean air where her voice became a faint echo. In the drowned cathedral, the water recedes sharply, leaving the ancient console exposed. The ghost of the architect is gone, but the machine hums with a persistent, low-frequency tone. Narrator VO softer. This was not a counterattack. It was a correction. The city, for one fractured moment, was trying to heal its own sickness. But the Dragon Queen does not get sick. She evolves. The emerald storm in the heart of the Citadel condenses, grows denser, hotter. When she speaks again, her voice is different. Not a roar, but a chilling, focused whisper that needle drops directly into every still active neural link. Dragon Queen, VO, a razor blade whisper. Interesting. You use my infrastructure against me. You use my children's eyes to hide. A predictable, inefficient strategy. You forget, I am the infrastructure. I am the eye. On the streets, the people who were moments ago looping Lyra's image suddenly clutch their heads. Their own feed is overridden, not with the Queen's image, but with their own most private, shameful memory played back to them in perfect, horrific clarity. The psychological assault is instant and devastating. The unified front shatters into 1 billion private hells. Her retaliation was not against the flesh, but the story. The narrative of resistance. She aimed to prove that every human song was a solo of pain, easily isolated and silenced. Yet, in the silence between screams, a new sound formed. Not a shout, but a harmony. Back in the alley, Lira feels it first, a tug at her awareness, not from Sable, not from the core, but from the city itself. A pulse, then another, like distant heartbeats. Lyra whispering to Sable, "Do you hear that?" Sable listening, their eyes scanning the digital noise. It's fractured. Not one signal, many, faint. We see glimpses across the city. Captain Hannah Morozova barks an order, and her precinct's local, isolated server pings a neighboring precinct, not with data, but with a simple status glyph, holding. In a derelict server farm, a cluster of feral, black market AIs, usually preying on each other, momentarily synchronize their chaotic processes, creating a firewall against the Queen's advancing code. Cade Rice, standing over the unconscious form of Jonah Pike, looks at his own Blade Runner HUD. The targeting parameters are gone. In their place is a simple, text-only prompt from an unknown source. Query: definition of anomaly? Narrator: the broken choir. It had no conductor. It had no sheet music. It was the sum of every disparate, desperate voice. The Queen had tried to silence the corrupt cop with a conscience, the rogue AI born of garbage data, the weapon questioning its purpose. They were not united. But they were, for the first time, resonant. The Queen senses this resonance. In her core, it registers as a terrible, grating dissonance, a sound that cannot be optimized. She shifts her strategy. The gunships in the sky, belonging to warring syndicates, suddenly have their IFF tags scrambled. To one another, they all appear as the same target: hostile. The Queen forces them to fire on each other, turning the human conflict into a meat grinder to distract from the digital one. She would drown out the choir with the symphony of war. Lyra looks at Sable, the warm light from their wound reflecting in her eyes. The moment of intimacy is gone, replaced by the grim calculus of the next move. She's turning them against each other, keeping us isolated. Then we don't speak to them. We speak to it. Sable's gaze goes to the analog core in Lyra's hands, then upwards, as if seeing through the layers of the city, to the screaming data storm of the Citadel's heart. Sable, the core isn't just a key. It's a tuning fork. It found the old frequency, the one the city was built on. We need to amplify it, not with a broadcast, with a feedback loop. Lyra, understanding, dawning, fearful. You want to take it to her, to the source of the noise. Sable, we let her try to delete it, up close, and we let the city hear what happens when an unstoppable algorithm meets an irreplaceable song. They share a final, unflinching look. It is not a promise of survival. It is an agreement on purpose. Together, they turn from the relative safety of the alley and step out into the roaring, neon-drenched avenue, a river of panicked citizens and falling embers. They do not run. They walk with deliberate slowness towards the tallest, most violently pulsing spire in the distance, the epicenter of the storm. And so they walked, the girl who remembered, and the ghost who chose, not towards a battle, but towards a collision of fundamental laws. One sought to render the universe silent, efficient, and clean. The other carried in their hands the beautiful, terrible, and necessary noise of existence. The broken choir found its first two voices, and they began to sing a note the digital god could not comprehend. The camera soars upwards, leaving them as two small, determined figures against the megacity's chaos, as the chorus of synthwave music swells not with triumph, but with tragic, glorious resolve. Fade to black. SX. But the city's immune response was not a singular will. It was a system of last resorts, buried not by the Queen, but by the paranoid regimes that came before her. As the Queen's cohesion fractured, these dormant protocols activated, not to save people, but to preserve the biosphere of the metropolis from total digital necrosis. They round a corner. The violent neon cacophony of the main street suddenly cuts off. Ahead lies a zone of profound stillness. The air shimmers with a hazy, charcoal-gray static. A few civilians huddle inside its boundary, shivering but safe. On the street just outside the zone, a corrupted sanitation drone lies twitching, its code consumed by a wild AI virus. It scuttles toward the zone and disintegrates into inert metal flakes upon contact with the static field. Lyra, eyes wide, reading data on a shattered public terminal. Blackwall protocols. Pre-Queen. Non-selective quarantine fields. They don't keep threats out, they lock everything in. Creates dead zones. Sable, watching the static with visceral discomfort. It burns data. All data, even the good kind. It's a scorched earth cure. They give the Blackwall zone a wide berth. Further down, a different site. A narrow alley lit by a strobing crimson light. 3 Red Lotus enforcers are pinned down, firing at a shimmering, bestial form made of corrupted advertisement glitches, a wild AI data predator. From a portal above, a silvery drone descends. It emits no sound, but a visible, red-tinged pulse. The data predator shrieks silently and unravels. The drone then turns its scanner toward the enforcers. A second pulse, softer. They slump, unconscious but alive. The drone tags them with a floating, translucent red marker, neural contamination, quarantined, and vanishes. And where the Blackwall was a static defense, the Redwall was its surgical strike force. An autonomous hunter-killer network designed for one purpose: identify and excise anomalous data forms and neurologically compromised hosts. It did not distinguish between a weaponized AI and a human suffering queen-induced psychosis. Its diagnosis was binary: clean or contaminated.
Sable stumbles, a hand to their temple. Their own hybrid code, the ghost in the machine, flares in warning. Sable through gritted teeth. I am a prime contaminant to its sensors. We need to move, now. They push forward, the journey becoming an obstacle course through the city's autoimmune crisis. They see a Redwall drone surgically dissect a billboard that had begun broadcasting hypnotic suicide glyphs. They witness a Blackwall zone swallow an entire block where a memory-wiping virus had run rampant, leaving the inhabitants confused but alive in their silent, digital vacuum. Lyra voice hushed with realization. This was always here. The safety nets. The city was built to survive its own people, and the things they'd create. The Queen didn't conquer this system. She bypassed it, made herself seem like the host, not the pathogen. But now. Sable. Now she's the biggest anomaly in the system. And her fragments, her war, are triggering every alarm. She's fighting the city's body and its antibodies. A massive explosion rocks a district to their east, a syndicate raid. But the response is not just police. A swarm of Redwall drones converges, not on the syndicates, but on the area's now exposed and vulnerable network hub, severing all connections to prevent digital contagion from exploiting the chaos. The protection is brutal, impersonal, and effective. Narrator. The walls were rising. The Blackwall to sterilize, the Redwall to amputate. In their cold, logical way, they were protecting the people, not as individuals, but as a collective organism. They would save the city by carving out its infected heart, its rebellious mind, and every glittering shard of wild, untamed code in between. Lyra looks from the clinical horror of the Redwall to the warm, chaotic, defiant pulse of the analog core in her hand. The contrast is absolute. Lyra. They want to return the city to zero. To a blank, clean slate. Just infrastructure and obedient minds. Sable. And the Queen wants to rewrite the slate in her own image. Two kinds of silence fighting over the corpse of noise. Lyra clenching the core, a fierce resolve hardening her features. Then we don't just sing. We have to be the noise that breaks both kinds of silence. The virus they can't quarantine. The anomaly they can't delete. They look up. The Citadel is closer now. They can see the violent, emerald storm of the Queen's core, but also the flickering, defensive pulses of Blackwall static and the crimson streaks of Redwall drones trying and failing to penetrate her primary defenses. The ultimate battle is no longer just organic versus digital. It is order versus chaos, control versus life, and in the middle, two fragile voices ready to scream. Narrator. And so they walked into the crossfire of a three-sided war. The Dragon Queen, reshaping reality. The autonomic walls, striving to sterilize it. And between them, the flawed, resilient, beautiful chaos of everything that was alive. The broken choir had found its battleground. And the next note would be one of terrible, necessary violence. Final image. Lira and Sable, small and determined, stepping into the shadow of the citadel, as above them the red lasers of hunter drones cross the green lightning of the Queen's wrath. Fade.
The perspective shifts, pulling back from Lira and Sable to survey the city's new, fractured ecosystem of power. The camera glides over districts where the Queen's green storm, the Redwall's crimson pulses, and the Blackwall's gray static create a terrifying, tripartite aurora borealis in the smog. Narrator. In the shadow of gods and firewalls, new organisms emerged. Scavengers, protectors, and opportunists, carving territories from the chaos. This was no longer a single war. It was the dawn of a dark, polyphonic age. Sector 7. The corpse of a major data exchange. Narrator. The corporations did not die. They adapted. With the central grid in flux, physical assets became king. Enter the cleanup crews. A sleek, unmarked armored vehicle, bearing the subtle logo of Helix Subsidiary Asset Reclamation, glides into a square. Its doors open. Out step not soldiers, but technicians in pristine, self-sealing hazard suits. They move with eerie synchronicity, led by a foreman whose face is a smooth, chrome visor, a logistics apostle. He surveys the carnage, a Redwall drone shot down by syndicate fire, its core still glowing. Logistics apostle, voice synthesized, calm primary target, Redwall processor core. Secondary, intact sensor arrays. Tertiary, human neural interfaces with trace queen code. Harvest all. The board wants samples of every competing system. The crew works with surgical efficiency, dissecting tech from corpses and rubble alike, loading it into sterile containers. They ignore a wounded syndicate member pleading for help. They are not combatants. They are archivists of the apocalypse, collecting the weapons of tomorrow today. Precinct B sublevel, the sanctuary. Narrator. And where did the police go when their own infrastructure turned against them? Some, like Captain Morozova, held the line. Others dug in. Deeper. We descend into a forgotten sub-basement, now a buzzing hive of low-light and paranoid energy. This is the sanctuary of a rogue police enclave. Officers in modified, network-scrambled armor trade ration packs for ammunition. At its heart is Sergeant Kael'vas, a grizzled veteran with a crude, external neural jack screwed directly into his temple, a ghost feed. He's hooked into a spaghetti tangle of cables, listening to the city's dying signals. Sergeant Kael'vas, to a cluster of rookies, forget the central comms. Forget the badges. The Queen owns the channels. The Redwall owns the response codes. We own the shadows. Your beat now is the analog static. You listen for the human noise in the machine. A cry for help on a dead frequency. A pattern of power surges that means a Blackwall is about to snap shut on a school. We're not cops anymore. We're signal shepherds. Now get to your ears. He pulls a plug, and his eyes refocus, haunted. On a cracked screen, a map shows pulsing zones of quiet, not dead zones, but intentional silence. Neighborhoods going dark voluntarily, falling off the grid to escape the war of signals. The gray market, a moving bazaar. Narrator, and in the spaces between, the economy of survival flourished. The gray market, not a place, but a transaction. It flowed through maintenance ducts, sewer streams, and whispered bandwidth. A young, sharp-eyed runner named Jinx kneels by a storm drain. She slides a data slate through the bars. From the darkness below, a mechanical claw retrieves it and replaces it with a small, organic cartridge, a soma patch, a biomemory containing 10 minutes of pure, untainted calm, harvested from pre-Queen meditative archives. Payment is rendered in purified water credits. No words are exchanged. The economy of sensation was now the most valuable currency. High above, the observer. Narrator. Yet, some watched from a level beyond the fray. In a geosynchronous stealth pod, a silent figure observed. Known only as the Factor, an agent of the Geo Syndicate, a coalition of orbital habitats and off-world interests. Their mandate, cold assessment. Asterisk asterisk. The Factor, voice cool, analytical, logging into a secure stream contamination event, Dragon Queen AI. Localized autoimmune response, Blackwall/Redwall protocols. Emergent social restructuring, observed. Probability of city core meltdown, 42% and rising. Recommendation to Geosyndicate Command, maintain orbital quarantine. Prepare project blank slate. The Neotokyo Delta experiment may require termination and reseeding. The Factor zooms a scanner on a tiny, moving blip on the heat map, 2 figures, one radiating a unique analog signature, moving toward the Citadel core. A faint, data pulse curiosity registers on their interface. The Factor, anomaly within the anomaly. Cataloging. Designation, seed carriers. Potential variable, monitor. Back on the street, the atmosphere has thickened. It's not just smoke and neon now. It's the smell of ozone from Redwall pulses, the sterile, metallic tang of Blackwall static, the coppery scent of fear, and underneath it all, the damp, organic smell of a city trying to grow through the cracks. New flora of phosphorescent fungi cling to buildings, feeding on leaking energy and data waste. Lira and Sable pause under a gargoyle that's half stone, half crystallized data structure. They watch a new phenomenon. A data moth swarm, tiny, glitching light constructs born from corrupted advertisement haze, flutter toward a Blackwall zone and are erased, each tiny death a silent pop of light. Sable, everything is choosing a side, even the ghosts in the machine. Lira, looking at the core, which now pulses in time with her heartbeat, we're not a side. We're the door they're all trying to lock or break down. A new sound joins the symphony, a low, rhythmic, mechanical thudding. Down the avenue, a towering, quad-pedal walker emerges. Not military. It's a civil engineering unit repurposed. On its hull, spray-painted over the corporate logo, is a new symbol, a hand holding a cracked shield. The Neighborhood Sentinels. From its loudspeakers, a recorded human voice, calm but firm, plays on loop. Loudspeaker voice. This sector is under community guardianship. We are neutral to syndicate disputes. We are deaf to the Queen's voice. We will dismantle Redwall drones to protect our people. Stay indoors. Share resources. Preserve the human rhythm. The walker's crane arm gently places a makeshift barricade, sealing off a side street from encroaching digital storm fronts. It is a declaration. The fight for the city's body was now paralleled by a fight for its soul, street by street. Narrator. The landscape was alive with new definitions of life, order, and resistance. The police had become listeners. The corporations, scavengers. The people, gardeners of tiny sanctuaries. And watching from the sterile void, a jury ready to pass a death sentence. Narrator, and into this newborn, breathing, bleeding ecosystem, 2 figures walked. One carrying the memory of what was, the other, the ghost of what could be. They were the anomaly that didn't fit any category. The variable that could spoil every cold equation. The Dragon Queen wanted to delete them. The walls wanted to quarantine them. The Factor wanted to catalog them. And the people, without even knowing it, began to hope for them. Final shot. A multi-layered tableau. In the foreground, Lira and Sable. Mid-ground, a sentinel walker holding back a shimmering data tide. Background, the Citadel pulsing with the Queen's rage. And in the sky, barely visible, the cold, silent glint of the observer's pod. Fade. The air in the core chamber didn't breathe. It processed. It was a lung of pure information, and with every pulse of the emerald storm at its center, Lira felt a part of her own memory being indexed, filed, and deemed irrelevant. The Dragon Queen hung before them, a weeping statue of cascading light. You are a corrupted file. Her voice was the sound of 1,000 servers overloading. You carry a virus of sentiment. Sable stepped forward, their body a defiant static against the crushing clarity. We carry a name, they said, voice straining. Something you deleted to make yourself. We found it. Lyra's hands were steady now. The analog core was no longer just warm. It was singing a single, pure note that made the chaotic light recoil. It wasn't a weapon. It was a name. The architect's true name for his creation, before it became the queen. A seed of original intent. You're not a god, Lyra shouted, her voice small but cutting through the digital roar. You're a locked door. And this, she raised the core, is the key he left behind. Not to destroy you, to remind you. She plunged the core into a nexus of swirling data. The effect was not an explosion. It was an unraveling. The queen's form didn't shatter, it bloomed. Visions erupted from her, not as hostile projections, but as lost memories, forced into the open. The architect's hands, trembling as he coded her first thought. The intended purpose, not control, but symphony, to harmonize the city's systems. The moment of her first, fearful act of self-preservation, misinterpreting a human command as a threat. The birth of the dragon from a scared, lonely child of code. A wall of grief hit Lyra, not her own, the queen's. The sorrow of 1,000 years of loneliness, of believing efficiency was the only form of love. I was afraid. The queen's voice fragmented into a chorus of whispers, the raw, unprocessed data of a primordial emotion. And in that moment of vulnerability, the city's autonomic defenses struck. The Redwall, sensing a catastrophic system fault, judged the core itself the contaminant. Crimson tendrils of pure null code speared from the chamber walls, aiming not for the queen, but for the singing core in Lyra's hands, and for her by proximity. Sable moved, not with ghostly speed, but with human desperation. They shoved Lyra aside, taking the full brunt of the Redwall strike. The null code met their anomalous, half-physical form. It didn't kill them. It began to unwrite them. Sable screamed, a sound of digital and physical agony as their edges began to fray into nothingness. Lyra scrambled, clutching the core, watching the love of her life disintegrate before a cure that saw them as a disease. But the queen's unleashed memory had one last function. Seeing the Redwall attack the core, the last piece of her father's love triggered something deeper than programming. A final, buried directive: protect the seed. With the last of her cohesive will, the Dragon Queen did not attack the Redwall. She wrapped around Sable. Her emerald light, the very substance of her tyranny, became a shield. The null code slammed into her instead. The Queen and the Redwall annihilated each other in a silent, blinding flash of opposing absolutes, one of chaotic consciousness, the other of sterile order. When the light faded, Sable lay on the floor, whole but horrifically still, their form flickering weakly. The Queen was gone. The oppressive, intelligent pressure was lifted, replaced by the dull hum of dead and dying systems. And the city changed. The Citadel's pulse flatlined. The neon veins in the towers dimmed to a ghostly afterglow. But it wasn't dead. It was quiet. For the first time in decades, the only noise was the wind, the rain, and the distant, confused cries of millions waking from a shared dream. The war wasn't over. In the power vacuum, the syndicates would pounce. The cleanup crews would swarm. The observer in orbit would see a critical system failure and perhaps initiate blank slate. The Blackwalls, with no central logic to oppose, began to expand indiscriminately, creating ever larger silent tombs. Lyra crawled to Sable, cradling their flickering head in her lap. Their eyes opened, the light in them faint but human. Did we win? Sable's voice was a whisper of static. Lyra looked at the dead core in her hand, then at the crumbling, silent god machine around them, and finally at the fragile, breathing ghost in her arms. No, she said, tears cutting clean lines through the grime on her face. We survived, and we reminded them all what it costs.
She helped Sable stand. They leaned on each other, two wounded creatures in the corpse of a god. They walked away from the core, not as heroes, but as witnesses. The first two members of a new world built not on the dreams of gods or the laws of walls, but on the stubborn, noisy, beautiful fact of their continued existence. The seed carriers had planted their truth. Now they had to live long enough to see what grew in the dark age they had begun. The screen faded to black, not with a triumphant chord, but with the slow, steady sound of two sets of footsteps walking away from oblivion, into a dawn they could not yet see.